the committee did Oregon no favors here, and I think it's unfortunate when you consider that they really earned probably the easiest path based on the season they had. That's just not the way it works out this year.
As you know, the first ever 12-team college football playoff bracket is set, and it gives us a ton to talk about today. And you've covered college football for a long time, so I'd love to just get your initial reactions on the bracket and what you think the committee got right and what you think they got wrong.
Well, look, I think they basically got it right in terms of the teams they included. When you get down to the 11th or 12th spot, there's always going to be disagreement and controversy because inherently you're comparing some flawed teams and you can make cases on one side or the other. So that part doesn't really bother me too much. I think the seeding is the biggest issue for me, and it's not necessarily the committee's fault. They were given a system by the conference commissioners where the top 4 ranked conference champions got first-round buys into the quarterfinals, but the problem is that system was created before this last round of conference realignment. So you still had a Pac-12, you still had Texas and Oklahoma in the Big 12. Things were a little bit more even. It made sense to maybe elevate winning a conference championship, but now that you have these mega leagues, you have one less power conference, it doesn't really work out the way I think they intended, because Boise State and Arizona State, great seasons, but they're not even anywhere close to being ranked in the top 4, and yet they get that kind of treatment in the bracket that really throws everything off. It creates an imbalance in the bracket, and it doesn't necessarily reflect the season we just saw.
Right. I want to lean into Oregon here for a minute, and I know you wrote a great column about how despite having the #1 seed, Oregon somehow has the toughest path to the Natty. So could you kind of dive into this a little bit more and explain how that could be the case?
Yeah, listen, Oregon, in a year where so many teams kind of stubbed their toe along the way, Oregon managed to go 13-0 and win the Big Ten, and they overcame a lot of travel. They had to make 4 trips to the East Coast or the Central Time Zone, which is pretty difficult when you're coming all the way from Eugene, Oregon. And they danced every dance. They came out on top. And you would expect as the #1 seed that they would get an easy path, or the easiest path available to them, at least on paper. But that's not what the case at all. And it goes back to the seeding problems that I think were just very clear in this bracket. Tennessee and Ohio State being seeded 8-9, both teams lower than they're actually being ranked by the committee. They get in that slot in the bracket where the winner plays Oregon. That's obviously tough for Tennessee and Ohio State and whoever wins that game, but I think it's also very tough for Oregon when you consider who their potential quarterfinal opponents could be. I think that's about as tough of a draw as possible. Meanwhile, if they win that game and get to the semifinals, they're likely to play Texas and play them in Dallas, which is essentially like a road game. So the committee did Oregon no favors here, and I think it's unfortunate when you consider that they really earned probably the easiest path based on the season they had. That's just not the way it works out this year.
Yeah, and obviously Alabama on the outside looking in, and the powers that be are already making the argument of, hey, we'll just play us off schedule if that's what it takes to get in. But in your opinion, is there any validity in that, or is that just the case of the Crimson Tide being a little salty?
Yeah, there's a lot of sour grapes going on with this Alabama/SEC situation. Look, the bottom line for Alabama is they lost 3 games, and 2 of those games were bad losses. You lose to Vanderbilt, which went 6-6. You lose to the worst Oklahoma team of the 21st century. And not just a loss that was like at the buzzer. They got pounded 24-3. It was not even competitive. So when you have those losses on your resume, you have to overcome them somehow. And Alabama, yeah, they had a good win over Georgia, but they didn't do enough this season to overcome those bad losses. And to me, at least in my opinion, the only way an SEC team, if you're losing to middle of the pack or bottom of the barrel SEC teams, you're going to need good non-conference wins, to me, to make up for that. The SEC seems to have taken the wrong lesson here. They're saying, well, if the committee's not going to reward good wins, then why schedule tough games? It's actually not true. They did reward good wins, and they rewarded a good win. The evidence for that is the fact that Alabama was the first team out. Given Alabama's resume, 3 losses, 2 bad losses, they should not have been the first team out. If you want to say just dumb down the schedule, strength of schedule doesn't matter, Look at Miami. Miami went 10-2, and they got left out because they didn't have the strength of schedule. So this is a dangerous game to play, and you're never going to hit it exactly right, especially now. It's hard to know. You schedule a game 2 years from now. How good is that team going to be with the transfer portal? It's really impossible to say. I say just schedule the games you want to play. The games are going to be good for your fans. Let the chips fall where they may, and don't try to game the system. Sometimes it'll work in your favor. Sometimes it won't. It didn't work for Alabama this year. Don't overreact to that.
In your opinion, which coach do you think is best built for this deep playoff run that we're about to have?
Look, I think you have to give the benefit of the doubt to Kirby Smart in Georgia. They've won 2 national championships. I think if you look at this Georgia team, there's been a lot of flaws throughout the season. But they managed to navigate the most difficult schedule in the SEC. They drew the short straw this year. They had to go on the road and play Alabama. They had to go on the road and play Texas. They had to go on the road and play Ole Miss. Tennessee at home. I mean, that's a real gauntlet that Georgia had to survive. They managed to get into the SEC championship game and to win it, even though their starting quarterback, Carson Beck, was not available for the second half. That's just a great coaching job by the Georgia staff this year and by Kirby Smart. They've won the playoff twice before. I think they're clearly, from a coaching standpoint, the best equipped to understand what it's going to take to win these 3 games and get another national championship back to Georgia.
All right, I want to do some quick predictions for the first round of action with you. So, first one, Texas versus Clemson. Could you break down this matchup and who you like the best of those 2 teams?
Yeah, well, there's going to be a lot of attention on the quarterback in this game. Cade Klubnik for Clemson from Austin, which kind of adds some spice to this game. And, look, Clemson, to be honest with you, I don't think they were anywhere close to one of the 12 best teams in the country. They got in by winning the ACC's automatic bid, but over the course of the season, they've been pretty average as a football team. Now, later in the season, I think they've shown some better signs, but still, just a couple weeks ago, they lost at home to South Carolina. So they're far from perfect. They're not even close to the program they were in 2016 and 2018 when they won national titles. But they're good defensively. I think they've improved on offense a little bit over the course of the season. I just think they're going to have a very tough time scoring on Texas, arguably the best defense in the country, playing at home. I don't love Texas's quarterback situation. I think they've been very choppy offensively, but I think they've got enough at home to beat Clemson in this first round game.
All right, Tennessee versus Ohio State in Columbus. I know Ryan Day, it seems like at least he's one of the first that kind of comes to my mind as coaches kind of playing for their job or coaching for their job right now. Do you think Tennessee can beat Ohio State in Columbus?
Certainly there's going to be a lot of pressure on Ryan Day coming out of that Michigan debacle and all the conversation for several weeks about his job status, although I think that's probably a little bit overblown at this point. It seems like Ohio State does not want to make a move on him. But they've got a tough opponent here in Tennessee. Tennessee is ranked in the top 10 in both offense and defense nationally. And they don't necessarily get that kind of credit for their offense because at times it has looked ugly. And, their young quarterback, Nico Iamaleava, has struggled at times. But, I think they're a really solid, balanced team. The question is just, playing on the road at night, up north in that cold environment. It's going to be interesting to see how they react to it. Again, first year of the playoff, I think these home games are going to be so crucial. So I would give the edge to Ohio State just slightly. But I think this is a big-time heavyweight matchup between 2 really talented teams. And I won't be shocked if the Vols go on the road and get a win.
Ooh, okay. Let's look at Penn State versus SMU. So we know the Mustangs bested Alabama on getting into the playoff. But do you think they actually have what it takes to advance past Penn State?
Well, again, I think for SMU, playing on the road is probably going to be the differentiator here. They're good, and I think they showed a lot of heart, and they have a lot of talent. They're not a team from the AAC that just happened to do well in the ACC this year. They have legit power conference talent. Their quarterback, Kevin Jennings, I thought played a really, really good second half against Clemson. He makes a lot of plays. Tough plays, inventive plays. He can improvise, and get the ball down the field. So I like SMU. I think this is going to be a pretty entertaining, close game. And I certainly would not be surprised if SMU wins, but I'm probably leaning a little bit toward Penn State. I thought they played pretty well in that Big Ten championship game. I think that offense is going to score some points.
All right, last two teams here. So got to head out to my home state where my alma mater, Indiana, is going to be heading across the Hoosier State to take on Notre Dame. So Dan, don't break my heart, but who do you see, or how do you see this one playing out?
Well, I really think for all the attention and focus that was on SMU, I question the inclusion of Indiana in the playoff more than any other team. If you look at the resume, they just didn't have quality wins. You know, they drew the easiest Big Ten schedule they could have possibly drawn. They had one opportunity against a high-level team in Ohio State, and I thought they were just very, very outclassed. And I think when you look at some of their weak spots, especially like the offensive line, I think they're going to have a very tough time running the ball and protecting the quarterback. I think it's probably going to look a lot like that Ohio State game looked, and I think Notre Dame rolls pretty easily in this one.
Okay. Last few questions here for you. So I don't know if it's too early for this or not, but what do you think the College Football Playoff Committee should consider changing first? The automatic buys for the conference champs or reseeding after the first round?
Well, these are going to be the big discussions for a lot of the conference commissioners over the course of the summer. Changing these things, it's always complicated, and trying to get consensus and agreement is difficult because everyone's got their own agenda and they don't want to be disadvantaged in some way. So that's tough to overcome. I really do think that they need to look at the seeding, and I think the commissioners are probably going to have to do that. I don't necessarily like the idea of reseeding after the first round. I think that probably makes it more confusing than it needs to be. I think anytime you're dealing with a bracket and you publish that bracket at the start of it, don't go changing it. You know, keep it all the way through. I think that makes it a lot easier to digest for fans. But, you know, I don't think you need to reseed if you simply have in the first round teams ordered in the way that they're ranked.
Okay. I don't think most people realize that the selection committee is made up of a combination of former journalists, players, current active athletic directors at major schools. So I'm curious, in your opinion, Dan, do you think that having ADs on the committee is problematic at all? Or what do you think is the best way to ensure a fair playoff? Or do you think what it is now is cool?
Yeah, I don't really understand a lot of the frustration about the makeup of the committee. I mean, this is pretty standard practice across the board in college sports. For any postseason, you have a committee. The committee is going to rely on people who work in athletic administration across the country. And I think that's good because I think it is a way for people to hold their colleagues accountable. I think what you don't want is a bunch of people who have no stake. They have no skin in the game in terms of making sure that the tournament is fair and that the field is selected on principles that reflect the ethos of college sports. And, I do think the committee does their best to mitigate any biases or conflicts of interest. You've got a lot of people in that room who are voting. I don't think any one particular voice makes the difference in these decisions. It's a variety of perspectives, former coaches, athletic directors. If you're going to have a committee, this is the kind of makeup of the committee you want. It doesn't mean you're always going to agree with all the decisions, and that's okay. But I think that's better than a computer formula or some kind of data set that has no flexibility for human input, because college football is only a 12-game season, and you don't have that many data points to put into a computer to know for sure whether the data you're relying on is good data. I had, especially, teams play 12 games. 3 of them are going to be probably blowouts against mismatched teams. Like, it just can get a little funky, and I don't like the idea of just relying on computers. We had that once with the BCS. It frustrated people to no end. So, you just have to learn to live with results you don't like. That's a problem in our society. It's particularly a problem with college sports.
Hey sports fans, if you want to see more videos like this, check out some of our other ones right here. And if you like what you see, make sure to hit the subscribe button and stay tuned for more from USA Today Sports.